In this tutorial, you will learn about plot stages, to identify each stage of plot, exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. You have probably noticed that most stories or movies include a series of events. You meet characters, and then the characters have all sorts of experiences, and usually everything wraps up at the end. This series of events in a narrative is called the plot. When you talk about what happened in a story, you are usually discussing the plot. A typical plot has 5 separate stages of development. Learning about these stages will help you keep track of what happens in a story. Click on each stage for an example. Each stage of a plot helps develop the story further. In a linear plot, these stages will appear in a certain pattern. It is important to remember that not every story will follow the pattern exactly. Click on each stage to learn more about it. The exposition of a story helps you answer the following questions. When and where does this story take place? Who are the characters? What problem or struggle are the characters going to have to face in this story? Exposition can occur at any point in the story, but most exposition will take place at the beginning. Click on the image to see an example of exposition. Information about the setting, characters, and conflict is in boldface. Gemma was tinkering with the gear shift on her bicycle when Juan stopped by. "Are you just about ready for the race?" he asked. "You bet," she said. "I just wish I could trust Ilana to play fair. She's determined to win and doesn't care if she cheats." Juan sighed and shook his head. The St. Lucia bicycle race had been Gemma's goal for years now. She'd been practicing constantly. Exposition is where a writer introduces the elements of his or her story. Characters, setting, and conflict. Read each example. Could it work as exposition? Click yes or no. In the rising action stage, you see the characters confront the main conflict. Events may enlarge or complicate the conflict, or a new minor conflict might be introduced. This stage increases the reader's interest. To decide whether an event or scene is part of a story's rising action, ask yourself, does this make the conflict more intense? Does this introduce a new element or new obstacle for the characters to face? Click on the image for an example. New complications and obstacles are in boldface. Gemma's stomach was in knots. She barely noticed as Ilana inched up right next to her at the starting line. "Good luck," Ilana snorted. "You're going to need it." Gemma opened her mouth to reply, and then the flag waved. A sea of bicycles took off. As she sped down the street, Gemma looked back. Ilana. Remember, rising action is where the plot thickens. It contains complications and events that stand in the way of solving the conflict. The climax of a story is usually the most intense or dramatic event or series of events in a story. It is also the turning point, where the story moves from making the conflict more intense to resolving the conflict. To identify the climax, ask yourself, where is the turning point in the story? When is the conflict most intense? Click on the image for an example. The climax is in boldface. "What are you doing?" Gemma shouted. Ilana had been following close behind her the entire race, and now she was nudging her front tire. As a character tries to solve his or her problem, the story tension grows. The climax of a story is the point of greatest tension. At the climax, something happens to show how the problem will be solved. Read each example. Could it be a climax? Click yes. In the falling action, the reader sees the outcome of the climax, the point of greatest tension, and starts to see how the conflict is going to be resolved. In this part of a story, the tension begins to ease. Click on the image for an example. Remember that in the falling action stage of a story, the conflict comes closer to being resolved and the tension eases. Read each example. Could it be part of the falling action? Click yes or no. Resolution is the final stage in most plots. All the conflicts are resolved, and the reader sees the final outcome of all the events. Sometimes a writer will leave out this stage so that readers can use their imaginations to guess at the ending. A writer might also include a final twist, hinting at or introducing a new conflict that will not get resolved. Click on the image for an example of resolution. Notice that the section in boldface The resolution is the final part of a story. Here, the problem has been solved and most of the reader's questions will have been answered. The story ends in a way that makes sense. Drag the statement that could be a resolution into the box. Match each part of this story to its correct plot element. A plot is the series of events or episodes that make up a story or a film. Most plots contain 5 basic stages. In a linear plot, these stages appear in a specific pattern. The stages of a plot are exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. The exposition introduces the characters and conflict. The rising action is where the plot thickens. The story reaches its turning point at the climax. Falling action shows you the results of the climax. Finally, the story's problems are solved in the resolution.